These are the notes for coordinate plane on pages 83 and 84. You'll need a pencil and a set of colors. You should grab highlighters, colored pencils, or crayons with the following colors: red or pink, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. If we start to outline this entire grid or this entire picture, you can start to see our coordinate plane or our coordinate grid. Now, the coordinate plane is made up of two intersecting or perpendicular number lines that are both matched up, or they cross at 0. Now, the first number line that we're going to look at, or our first coordinate, is found by the x-axis. And the x-axis is this horizontal number line, and we're going to color that in yellow. Our second number line, or our vertical number line, is our y-axis, and we're going to color in our y-axis orange. And that is this vertical number line that makes up our coordinate plane. Now, if we look at our coordinate plane, the coordinate plane starts with the letter C. So if we think about this C, it can help us to figure out how to name the different parts of the coordinate plane. So we're going to draw a big C all the way around the coordinate plane. Now, the first section, or quadrant, that we draw that C in is going to be called Quadrant 1. We're going to color in all of Quadrant 1 with blue. So we're coloring in this first section blue. Make sure you're coloring lightly so you can still see the coordinate plane underneath. And if we follow the C further, getting out of Quadrant 1, we can start to color Quadrant 2 green. So we start with the blue Quadrant 1, we go over to the left on the C, and we get to Quadrant 2. And make sure you don't color in that ordered pair or inside that box. And go around the box there. We're going to use that later. So the green section is Quadrant 2. If we follow the C further, then we can get to Quadrant 3. And we are going to color Quadrant 3 with purple. So we go around, 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 and the third section we get to on that C is going to be Quadrant 3. And we're going to color that whole section in purple, but color around that box because we're going to use that for something else later. We're going to color in Quadrant 4 with red. Now we go around, and the fourth section, or the last section we get to on that C, is Quadrant 4. Now we're going to color in this entire section red, and we're going to go around this box so we can use that to write in something later. Make sure we're coloring in very lightly so we could still see the grid, the coordinate grid or coordinate plane underneath. Now, when we're looking at these two boxes with the parentheses in them, these are both called ordered pairs. And the order matters, and we'll see that in a moment. But the ordered pairs relate to the points on the grid, and it tells you where on the grid those points are supposed to be. Now, the ordered pair here is going to give us the point that's in the center of the grid, which is called the origin. Now, if we're looking at those ordered pairs, the order matters because the first coordinate, the first number, is always going to be the x-coordinate. So we're going to color that in the same color as the x-axis because the x-axis is going to tell us what that x-coordinate actually is. And the y-coordinate is the same color as the y-axis because we're looking at the y-axis to see what coordinate that is. So the x-coordinate relates to the x-axis, y relates to the y, and if we look at the x-axis, we get a positive 4, so we see that our x-coordinate is going to be a positive 4. And if we look at the y-axis, the point is next to the negative 3 on the y-axis, so our y-coordinate there is going to be a negative 3. And this is the ordered pair for that point at the location positive 4, negative 3. Now, if we are looking at the point in the center called the origin, it is in the center, so it's at 0, 0. So the ordered pair for the origin is at 0, 0. Now we're going to look at what types of points are in the coordinate plane. So in quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4, there's different types of integers that will make up the points. Now the positive side of the x-axis is touching quadrant 1, so we'll have a positive x, and we're on the positive side of the y-axis, so we'll have a positive y. So two positive coordinates will give us a point in quadrant 1. Now quadrant 2 is on the negative side of the x-axis, so with a negative x and a positive y, you will have a point that ends up in quadrant 2. If you have a negative x and a negative y, two negative coordinates, you'll end up in quadrant 3. And with a positive x and the second coordinate, or the y-coordinate, being a negative y, you'll end up in quadrant 4. So positive, positive is quadrant 1, negative, positive is in quadrant 2, negative, negative will be in quadrant 3, and positive, negative will be in quadrant 4. Now these 2 points are on the y-axis, and we have, to the left is going to have a negative x, and to the right we'll have a positive x coordinate. So if we're in the center of the x-axis on the y-axis, we're going to have a 0 coordinate for x. So to the left we have this negative x, and to the right we have a positive x. Now if we're looking at the y-coordinates, we have 2 points that are on the x-axis, and we'll have 0. So if we go up, we'll have a positive y. If we go down, we'll have a negative y. But if we're in the center, we are going to have 0 for our y-coordinate. So if we highlight this x-axis or horizontal axis yellow, that refers to the first coordinate in each of these ordered pairs. So if we want to know what our first coordinate or our x-coordinate is, we are going to look at the x-axis. Now if we highlight the y-axis orange, we are going to be looking at the second coordinate, or the y-coordinate. We need to be looking at this vertical y-axis when we are looking at our second coordinate, or trying to figure out what our y-coordinate is. Now for A, we have our x-coordinate and then our y-coordinate. So for an x of 0, we're going to stay the same, and for a positive y, we're going to go up. So we're going to stay in the center and then go up 2, and make a point. We're going to label that point as point A, and that point ends up being on our y-axis. For point B, our x-coordinate and our y-coordinate, our x-coordinate's negative, so we're going to be going left 3, and our y-coordinate's positive, so we're going to be going up 4. So we'll go 1, 2, 3 to the left, and 1, 2, 3, 4 up, make our point, and label that as point B. If we look at the x-axis, we're at negative 3, and if we look at the y-axis, our point is next to a positive 4. And we are in quadrant 2. Our first coordinate is our x-coordinate, our second coordinate is our y-coordinate. So our first coordinate is positive, so we're going to go to the right on the x-axis. And our second coordinate is negative, so we're going to be going down on the y-axis. So we're going to go right 1, 2, 3, 4, and down 2, and make our point and label that as point C. Now if we draw a C, we get to the fourth section, or quadrant 4, when we get to point C. For point D, we have our x-coordinate and then our y-coordinate, and our x-coordinate is negative, so we're going to move to the left, and our y-coordinate is 0, so we're not going to move at all. So we're going to go to the left 3 and make a point, because we're not moving up and down, and label that as point D. Now point D is on that horizontal, or x-axis. Now for point E, we have our first coordinate is our x and our second coordinate is our y. So we have a positive and a positive, so we're going to go right 4 and then we're going to go up 3 to get to point E. So right 1, 2, 3, 4, up 3, and we're going to plot our point and label that point as point E. Now if we draw our C, we start in that first quadrant, so we know that point E is in quadrant 1. So we have our x coordinate and our y coordinate, and both of those coordinates are 0. So we're not going to move to the left or right, and we're not going to move up or down. This point, or point F, is going to be drawn in the center, and that is at the origin. We have our x coordinate and then our y coordinate, and this time our x coordinate's negative, so we're going to go to the left, and our second coordinate's negative, so we're going to go down. So to the left 2 and down 3, we'll make our point and label it G. And we move over, starting with our C, and we get to the third section, and that is called Quadrant 3. For point H, we are going to find H on the coordinate plane, and when we look at our x-axis, or our x-coordinate, we're in the center of the graph, and for our y-coordinate, we went down 3 to get to H. So our x-coordinate is going to be 0, and our y-coordinate is going to be a negative 3, and that happens to be on our y-axis. Our next point is point I, and we are going to look for point I over here on the coordinate plane. We went to the right 4, and then we stayed in the center, so we moved to the right, so that's going to be a positive 4 for our x-coordinate, and then we didn't move up or down any, so our y-coordinate, we stayed in the center, and that is going to be a 0 for the y-coordinate. And point I ends up being on our x-axis. Now, if we go to the left 4, our x-coordinate is going to be negative 4, and to get to J for our y-coordinate, we're going to go up, or a positive 2. So our y-coordinate is a positive 2. And we get to the second section when drawing our C on the coordinate plane, so that is going to be in quadrant 2. Now here's K on the coordinate plane. We're going to go left 3 and then down 4. So left for our x-coordinate is going to be a negative, or a negative 3, and down is going to be negative, or our negative 4 for our y-coordinate. And if we go around our circle, we get to our third section, or quadrant 3, where K is. So for this ordered pair, we have our x-coordinate and our y-coordinate, and our x-coordinate is 0, so we're not going to move for our x-coordinate, and our y-coordinate is positive, so we're going to be moving up that amount. So we're going to stay in the center and then just move up 3 spaces. So if I'm trying to find the distance to the y-axis, I'm actually looking at the x-coordinate, and if I'm trying to find the distance to the x-axis, I'm actually looking at the y-coordinate. So for this next point, we have our x-coordinate goes to the left 5 spaces, and our y-coordinate goes up 6 spaces. So if I'm left 5, I'm at negative 5, and up 6, that point is going to be at a positive 6. And if we are looking at the distance to the y-axis, we're actually looking how far we moved left or right, which is our y, which is actually our x-coordinate. So we moved to the left 5 spaces, or we are 5 units away from the y-axis. If we look at our y-coordinate, we moved up 6 spaces, so we are 6 units away from the x-axis. Now for our next point, our x-coordinate is telling me that I am going to move to the right 7 spaces, and our y-coordinate is telling me that I'm going to go down 8 spaces. So I'm going to move to the right to a positive 7, then I'm going to go down to a negative 8, and that's where my new point's going to be. So if I'm looking at the distance to the y-axis, I'm looking at the distance to that vertical line. So I move to the right 7 spaces, so I'm 7 spaces or 7 units away from that y-axis. And I moved down 8, so I am 8 spaces away from that x-axis, or 8 units away from that x-axis. Using any given number below only once, create an ordered pair that describes a point on the y-axis. So if I am looking at my x and y coordinates, and I want to point on the y-axis, that's going to be any of these possible points on the y-axis. So the left is going to be negative, so we could have a negative 0 or positive number for each of these coordinates. And to the left, none of these points are to the left, so my x can't be negative, and they're not to the right. They're all in the center, so the only choice for my x-coordinate is going to be a 0. For the y, I can go down on the y-axis, so I can be negative. I can stay in the center and be on the y-axis, and I can go on the positive side of the y-axis. So really, any point could be written for this coordinate. I'm going to choose just a negative 4. I could have put it in a negative 3, a 1, or a 5 though. Any of those points would have given me, any of those coordinates would have given me a point on the y-axis. You should have 100% of your notes completed with all work copied and shown. Write down anything that you did not understand on a separate piece of paper. Here are some examples of good comments or questions. What is the difference between the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate? Why is the distance the x-axis figured out by taking the absolute value of the y-coordinate? How do you graph a point on the coordinate plane? I don't understand how to name the quadrants because I thought that the top left should be quadrant 1.